everyone, my name's Emma and this is Represent. Today I'm very excited to be joined by the Chief Data Officer for TFL, Transport for London, and I'm joined by Sager Weinstein. Thanks so much for joining us on our sofa today, Lauren.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So, Chief Data Officer for TFL, can you talk us through a normal day in the life?
Right. So, TFL, we are responsible for helping Londoners get to where they want to go. And so we connect the city. And to do that, we have to think about all the journeys on our network. So it's a huge amount of transport across our network. And so, which is really exciting for me, that gives us lots and lots of data. So what does my day look like? Which is a really interesting question because there's a lot of difference in terms of what you're doing, because as a chief data officer, a lot of what I want to do is sort of focus with my colleagues on the questions that will help them run our network better and how do we use data to get at those answers. And so from a practical point of view, there's lots of meetings to talk about that, think about how we can create data tools to help us give this information in ways that people can understand what's going on the network, both for our office staff, for our frontline staff, and for our customers. So what I do really on a day-to-day basis is sort of sit in meetings, write emails, write proposals, look at prototypes of dashboards, and talk to people about what would be useful.
And how big is your team at TFL?
So I actually have about 100, so give or take. So we sort of flex between sort of sometimes 80 to about 100, and it's a mix. So it's a mix of sort of data engineers, sort of doing sort of the technical build work, and we have a range of people we call data product managers, and their job is actually very similar to my job, which is to sort of really focus on how the data is going to be used, how it can be useful. And then we have visualizations designers to sort of look at how we can create dashboards to take this data in ways that people can sort of consume it. And then I have a data science team as well.
Fantastic. So very busy days. How do you chill out after a day like that?
So I sing in a choir. So I sing in a group called Voce, and I have been singing with them for a long time, really, since I first came to London. And we've done some really cool stuff. We got to sing at the O2, and we sang with the Stones. So that was really cool.
I'm sitting on the sofa with a pop star. Oh my Lord, that's amazing.
So that, I've got to say, is probably the highlight of what we've done.
So you're obviously incredibly excited about the work that you do with data at TFL, but you haven't always been in technology, correct?
So it's interesting because my job has been this translator role. So, and it's interesting to think about, like, how did I get here? Because, like, I don't do coding. I know a little bit, but I actually wasn't trained as a coder. I do some sort of analytics work, although I don't, sort of do it on a daily basis. But I have some training in sort of that sort of background of quantitative analytics. But I've really been interested in sort of the management and policy and leadership and using information and analysis to make better decisions. And so tech is really an enabler to do that. And what is really exciting to me is how we can use data to answer questions that we just couldn't answer before. And so I think in terms of my own journey, that's really sort of been where I've been in this middle point of always really comfortable with technology. I grew up as sort of a kid from a science family of engineers on sort of both sides of my family of techie people. And, I was definitely had sort of computer at home when I was growing up and sort of dabbling in sort of basic and things like that. And I was always kind of the person who was working in a policy or working in government, public service mostly, but really comfortable with technology. And so I sort of ended up just sort of really pivoting from a very sort of pure strategy sort of type and delivery and sort of management type of role into something that was much more sort of tech related. And first it was working on our Oyster card back, sort of back when we were just at Oyster, and I was working on how do we bring contactless payment to London, which was sort of an exciting project. And then as I was doing that, it was like really clear there was all this really useful data that was coming out of our system. And I just thought, we've got to be able to do more with this. What could we do? What questions can we not answer today, but maybe we could answer tomorrow with data? Mm-hmm. And that ability to be this detective, like a data detective, was really what sort of helped me get from, sort of working purely in a management type of role in terms of sort of governing, governance and TFL into the really tech side of things. And that was where that sort of mix of like using technology to help solve problems is really where I see my role today.
Fantastic. I mean, what an exciting project to be brought onto first is your entrance to tech with the Oyster card. So that came in 2003, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
And really, it was the first time that TFL was able to track customer journey from tap in and tap out.
So it's interesting because, we brought in sort of the Oyster card, and it was early on when I joined TFL in 2002. And it was, it was a change, and it was solving a technology problem. So the problem we were trying to solve was really a business problem, how to use technology to solve it. And the challenge is that London is growing. We needed to collect revenue. We need to collect revenue quickly and efficiently. And so we had to get people through the gates. And people were using magnetic tickets. And, nobody really needs to use them anymore. And hopefully you don't, because it's like they're slow. They're costly to sort of maintain a ticketing system, and they're not particularly, it's not a great sort of solution. It's an old solution. So we said, okay, how do we help our customers travel first with the Oyster card? And it helped customers speed through the gates. You could get 30, 40 people through a gate line in a minute, and that's really fundamental at our busy stations. And so we did this, other cities have done this too. We were not the first. And it was a really good offering for our customers, because our customers suddenly just were able to use pay as you go, put money on their card, and travel. But this is again where you used to say, how does first technology help you solve a problem? And then how does data help you? We said we should be able to do something more. And that was really the first sort of data project that I worked on at TFL, was saying, okay, we have this information. Could we sort of understand first travel patterns better on the tube? And then could we understand how people are traveling in groups and in patterns over times a day, over days and weeks, and then plan our bus networks better? And so that was sort of the first big project that I used, using sort of the data. And the teams that worked with me on it were able to sort of demonstrate that, yes, this is a really rich data set to understand patterns across our network.
Interesting. And you mentioned there you've got this incredible data set. Okay, so you're tracking people.
Well,
moving
tracking
around.
is always like a tricky world, because people feel like it's important to say, okay, trust is so important to us, and so we take very seriously all the customer information. So we look at sort of patterns across the network. So we're measuring sort of interactions with the system. And so, and that's, I think, important, because what we aren't doing is we're not sort of tracking and following people, but how do you sort of take this information and sort of like take, all the different little small components of travel and build the bigger picture. And so you have this huge sort of patterns of people traveling all through, and these sort of volumes and footfalls of the network. And how do you how do you make sense of that? And that's really, I think, really exciting.
So from an individual perspective, I tap in at Elephant and Castle, I tap off at Archway, and then I take the bus to Crouch End, right? That you're not going to know that is Emma Rice, who lives in Southwark, who has done that journey. You're just going to know that one of those journeys took place at that time. Well,
we look at it in different ways. So we do need to know that it's you, so that if you had a problem, so occasionally people will have if you didn't tap out by mistake and you sort of got an overcharge in your journey, we'd want to make sure that you were able to sort of get the money back in your journey. If there's a problem on the network, you could claim for sort of a delay. If your sort of journey was really, really slow. So we do need to know it's you. We also, if you're putting money, either money in an Oyster card or using your bank card, we need to charge you properly. And so what we do with that is in our data platform, we sort of have hashing techniques to sort of basically scramble your ID so that we're protecting privacy on that. And it's really cool, because you then want to understand how many people are traveling from here to there. Could you provide different bus services that would be better for people? Can you change the route to make it easier to transfer between one bus and another bus? What's the frequency we should be offering for services, things like that.
Interesting. And so it went from Oyster to contactless. What's next? What are we going to be? Am I going to get on the tube with my contact lenses soon? What's going on for the future of using the transport network in London?
So we had, it's interesting. Back in 2004 and 5, we were sort of saying, okay, what could you do with this? One of the things.
Fingerprints?
But do you really want to be?
No.
So that's the question. Like, do people really want to be giving that information. You want to have that sort of flexibility in the network. So some people can be known to us, and we encourage that. So, we could, if you sign up for an email, we can give you an email that either says if you want to get information about like things to do in London, we send out a great Coronation Weekend one. If you don't want to get that, we can send you a service one that sort of tells you relevant information about where you're going to go, because there's certain places that we wouldn't send an information to you if you're in a part of London things that are happening in another part of London. So we kind of, we want to have some connection with you because we want to give you a better customer service. But, we're providing sort of services for the public, and we want to protect people's privacy. So I don't think that I just don't see any public appetite or any appetite for anybody wanting to sort of give out that level of sort of information. So how do you make it easy and seamless to travel, but not creepy? It's not, we're a public transport agency. We want to be open to everybody to travel and be comfortable about the information that they're sharing with us.
Interesting. And thinking about future tech, how are you guys using AI and ML at the same time?
So this is really sort of an emerging area, and I feel like I'll say something today and something tomorrow is going to change. It's very exciting. But there's also just a lot of questions. And I think, first of all, how can we sort of use some of this machine learning and some of the sort of things to automate some of the processes that we have? How do we do better in terms of thinking about, when you want to do a repair on our network and our system? Could we do better sort of reliability assessments on our network so that we know when to send engineers out to places? Can we control our roads better by having better understanding about flows on our network and highlighting incidents when they happen, right as they happen, and giving our sort of people who sort of manage our network better information as what we call a decision support tool. So I think there's a huge opportunity with that. I think there's a huge question about what's going to happen with the growth of sort of AI techniques. How will this change? And I think there's a lot of questions right now. And how do you think about this both with your ethical framework and also from a practical point of view? Which questions are most important to answer? How do you think about trying things out to do prototypes of new technology? And then when there's a business case, what do you do with it?
And you mentioned there about the Oyster card, London not being the first city to bring this in. And I'm interested as to how London compares with other city transport systems. I'm thinking Japan and South Korea. Do you look to other countries for inspiration, especially around the way that data is being used?
So we do. And actually, I was just in Seoul a few weeks ago. There was a sort of an exchange, and I went, the British Embassy sort of asked me to come with a small delegation from London to talk about smart cities. And it was really sort of very interesting because we were meeting with the infrastructure team and sort of land transport for the Korean government. And it's always great to get out there and to sort of see how another city approaches a problem. And actually, particularly when you've been in London for so long now. So you can probably tell from my accent, I didn't grow up in London, but I've been here now over 20 years. And so it's always good to sort of go out and explore and sort of learn from others. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in Korea, when I was in Seoul talking to the South Korean government, is that there's a real focus on sort of the technology infrastructure investment. And they say, okay, we're going to build this. We can see the case. We're going to just go quickly. And that was really, that just drive for sort of progress and saying there's an opportunity here. We're going to seize it. We're just going to make it happen. That sort of enthusiasm and sort of drive was actually very inspiring to say, okay, yeah, we can just do this. Because sometimes, London is so big, it's so complicated, and we do so much, but it's been a challenging couple of years, as you can probably imagine, coming out of COVID. How do I use data and how do I use tech to solve our problems? Because London is growing, London is changing, and how do we use technology to be on the forefront? So I learned, I thought that was really helpful when I was in Korea.
Absolutely. And TFL, you just had your birthday this year, right?
So the tube is 160 years old, and which is very exciting. So TFL had our 20th anniversary back in 2020. So TFL is a much sort of a younger organization of being sort of a very integrated transport network. But the tube, was very exciting to sort of look and think about our heritage. So you think about the way that it's shaped the city, and I think, for me, I find it really inspiring how transport infrastructure and how connecting people so they can get to where they want to go to really sort of helps us sort of build and develop and sort of grow as a city, and how the fundamental role that TFL plays and the Tube has played through many years, and how TFL now plays in terms of getting people to sort of think about connections with not only the Tube but bus and walking and cycling. I find it really exciting. So it was a great anniversary, and I've got my little 160 Love the Tube pin on.
I love it. It goes so well with my trousers.
I know.
I'm still one of those. And you can feel the history when you're, when you're on the Tube, especially the Bakerloo line, I will say. You can definitely feel the history. Do you know the story about the announcer and would you like to tell that story? It's such a lovely story.
This is an embankment statement. It's an embankment station. And this is actually, I love the story because this was a call that came in back to our contact center. And the widow of the announcer had called us and had said, I noticed you've changed the announcement at Embankment Station. And the person said, yes, we did. We've updated all of our recordings. And she said, would you mind if I could get a recording of this? And he said, okay. And she said, because this was my husband. And he died many years ago, but I still love going to Embankment Station and listening to his voice. And I understand you've updated the announcements, but could I just get a sort of recording so I can play it at home? And so our contact center team sort of took that away and said, oh, let me find out. And actually we said, you know what? We need to put this announcement back. And so the announcement is back at the station. So it is a different announcement than the other pre-recorded announcements. But yeah, you go and you feel that sort of sense of history. And you feel, what I also love about the story is that it's like you really feel the connection to people. And people sort of making your network, people building transport infrastructure in all sorts of ways, people building tech in all sorts of ways. And like how, we're building cool stuff, but it really comes down to people.
I just love that story so much. So if you haven't been through Embankment Station, I would definitely recommend it and take a listen out. So you're building a network for everybody. And so diversity obviously has to be completely at the core of building out your tech teams. Why is it so important that we get more women working in transport and tech in transport?
Yeah, so we have a challenge here, right? Because in the transport sector, women, we don't have as many women as are reflected in society. In the tech sector, again, a problem where we need to get more women to represent, as we do in society, represent in tech. So both of these are areas where I've been really sort of very keen to help support and grow and encourage women. So I'm on our board there's a group called Women in Transport, and I was one of the founding members back in 2005, and I'm on the board to help shape that. And so for there, we're doing a fair amount of thinking about leadership training, thinking about sort of mentoring, thinking about how do we sort of support each other. And both women and men are really involved in terms of helping develop women in the industry. And then, of course, on the tech side, it's also really important. And how do we support women getting into tech at all different types of roles in tech? So how do we encourage women, and how do we encourage girls to study in schools to study subjects that will help them get confident and comfortable. And I love talking about how do you do that, because I have strong opinions. And then also, if you haven't studied it in school, how do you enter? How do you gain the skills? How do you think about coding skills? How do you think about the other soft skills that are fundamental? So the work that I do, which is not technical, but is fundamental for tech and data, which is that thinking about the questions, framing the questions, delivering the right tools, and how do you help women do that, because we bring, the more people you have, the more diversity brings different perspectives, and it's fair. So that's what we need to do.
Absolutely. And you're talking there about women who are wanting to potentially upskill as well. So this September, we are releasing our mid-level career accelerator, which we're very excited about, which is 8 weeks of intensive training for our community who are either tech returners, or they're women who are already in technology, but they want to kind of super speed their careers, if you like. Now, for you as a career switcher, if you like, coming from a place where you weren't traditionally STEM beforehand, how has lifelong learning, if we can call it that, really impacted your career trajectory?
So I've done it formally and I've done it informally, right? So I've done both programs to say, okay, when I was early on in my career, I worked for a few years, and then I went and I did a graduate degree, and I knew at that time, because I'd been working for the city of LA, I knew I was very interested in transport, but I had some specific skills I wanted to sort of get more comfortable with, and on the sort of the analytics side. So I did skills with that in my graduate degree. From my postgraduate sort of, I was basically public policy degree. But I also knew that like I wanted some sort of leadership and management, so I did it through a formal program at first, but it's got to be more, I think, than just formal. I think there's also a huge opportunity for sort of informal learning as you go. And in fact, you get very stale if you were to sort of just learn and then go off and work and then wait and not do learning. So I think the lifelong learning idea is absolutely crucial, particularly in tech, particularly in data right now. Everything is changing. I think the hardest challenge sometimes, at least for me personally, is that you're so busy. How do you build the time to sort of step away and think about it? And so I think that's one of the things that I have been thinking about. Okay, I've been learning and sort of developing and particularly thinking about where the industry is going, but how do I make sure I spend enough time thinking about it rather than trying to solve so many problems, which obviously you need to do, but how do you sort of build in the time to reflect and learn as well?
You have to be so disciplined.
Yeah.
It's so difficult, whether or not that's taking out half an hour in the morning and building into your routine that you're just reading reports and network things when you're having your coffee in the morning. How do you do it currently? How do you stay ahead of the game?
I mean, so there's a couple sort of productivity writers I really like. And some of them have given, there's a woman called Laura Vanderkam who really talks about like some of the techniques to build this into your time and to think about the time and think about how you're using the time in your day. And I found that really personally very sort of helpful for me to be like, okay, this is important. I'm going to build my time around doing it. And it's exactly that. And in some days it is sort of like just taking a morning and doing that. Some days it's sort of like deciding, okay, I need some thinking time. I'm going to walk and think. And then sometimes it's just sort of saying, okay, I put aside stuff to read because I want to be on top of things. I'm going to actually spend the time now and read it. So I think different things will work for different people. One of the things that I've also been keen to do working with my team is build in that sort of that time for learning in sort of our team. So our data scientists have like time where they've set aside a sort of time for sort of learning and learning new techniques. And they also sort of come together once a week with sort of knowledge shares where someone will say, okay, this is not only what I learned because they went away and learned it, but this is how I'm going to share with the rest of the team. And that's really also fundamental too, so that you sort of bring it back to sort of share your learning with others. And our data engineers have do this too, and we're looking at things like career paths, and so being able to sort of say, okay, this is the sort of work you're doing today. Where would you like to go? How do you manage your career? How do we help you? How do we help you with the technical skills? And how do we help you with the non-technical skills? So would you like to sort of get used to giving presentations because you want to work on that? Is it sort of getting a chance to sort of manage and mentor? Is it things like that? And so that's sort of the way that we sort of think about building up our team and developing them.
Absolutely. And I just want to empower our community, if to have that confidence to turn around to your employer and say, hey, look, I need half an hour every morning just to build up my knowledge in this. I think it would be really beneficial. If your employer has your best interest at heart, then they'll want to see you upskilling. Yeah. They'll want to see you investing in your future knowledge. And ultimately, that means
it's good for everybody.
It's good for everyone, right? Yeah. I think that's so interesting. I think thinking about your own time as far as a currency as well is so important because, you get to a certain level in your career and you are so busy that taking that time out to think about how can I not just live in the present, but think about a couple of steps forward is super key. I've got a couple of questions from our community, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of them is, she says, hi, I'm a junior software developer. What could my career look like at TFL?
So it sort of depends on the sort of area that you're interested in. So I'll talk a little bit about both. So from my data team, we are building sort of products. So I sort of mentioned, for example, the sort of the understanding travel patterns. We have a sort of a suite of products called Journeys and Demand. And that is sort of understanding how busy our stations are. It's understanding where people are traveling over the course of the day. And we also understanding how people are sort of traveling on the bus. Because on the bus in London, you tap on when you enter the bus, but you don't have to tap off. So how do we know, what the patterns are like on the bus? bus. We have a sort of an algorithm called ODX, which basically uses sort of bus telemetry data along with ticketing data to sort of set out the patterns of where a bus is going. We have sort of other products to sort of think about how the road network works, and so we have those sorts of data products that we're sort of building out. And then we also that's sort of on the data side, but we're also sort of building tools in general, because it's not only the sort of the understanding what's happening, it's how do you collect the revenue on the network, how do you build sort of control systems, how do you sort of engineer things, of which the software engineering and software development, you can also sort of work in both sort of the data side. You can work on sort of application, website development. We have TFL Go, which is our app that gives customer information, or engineering. Within the actual sort of engineering fields, it's become very software driven as well. So there's a lot of opportunities to come and work on sort of interesting projects. And then, as I sort of mentioned before, we're really eager to sort of develop and grow our teams and give people a chance to sort of say, okay, here I'm coming in. How do I build my career? How do I work across different areas? How do I get specialisms, and how do I develop skill sets, but also not get pigeonholed? So there's a lot, and we're always hiring.
No surprise.
Yes.
Sounds fascinating. Yeah. I might just pop over. I just need to learn how to be a software developer first. We've got to wrap up because of time, but just one final question. When we ask this to all of our interviewees, if you had the chance to read one book again, what book would that be, and why?
I was thinking about this because, I guess I'm going to say there's two. So there's a book called Crabgrass Frontiers, which is kind of that aha moment that I had, which was about how transport is really the connecting tissue of developing cities. So that moment was oh, I really want to work in this area. It's fantastic. But in terms of I love literature, I love reading, and I love fiction. So I really also have to say, okay, what's one of those books I've just loved and have read a lot of times? And Anne of Green Gables was one of those sort of books that I read as a child, and that sort of the story and that sort of heroic sort of spirit and that sort of different ways of looking at the world that sort of Anne had is something that I always really enjoyed, and I love that book.
I was going to say, great heroine to
yes,
have. Yeah. And final question. If you could share one word of wisdom with your younger self, what would that be?
I mean, I had never expected that I would end up in London. And so I think that, first of all, when you're really thinking about doing hard work and working hard, being sort of flexible about the work you want to do, and so working hard and having a plan, but also not being totally wedded to it because life takes you in all sorts of different places. And so I think that I would go back and tell myself, yeah, work hard, but be open to possibilities, because you'll never know where you end up.
That's great. Great note to end on. Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you for sharing your story, and fascinating to hear about what you're working on at TFL.
Oh, thanks so much. This is great fun.